Testing. Oh, there. Now we're hot. Now we're hot. Yeah, yeah. So welcome everybody to our second of our three classes here. I have a bit of a cold, so I'm going to sit. Well, I like to sit, but I have a bit of a cold, so if I sound a little controversial, and a little, sick, and working full time, it's just wearing me out. I think I can do something about this, right? I could retire, but we're not quite there yet. So working full. I so enjoy these classes too. I'm like, oh man. So anyway, we're looking at Father Abraham's Many Children by Tyler Mayfield, and I showed you his best picture. That's Tyler. That's the way I remember him. He's still teaching.
I like his song.
You like his song? Yeah, yeah.
It's
a good song. It's a good song.
I've been playing it.
You have? Good, good. Yeah, yeah. Well, he's professor at Louisville Seminary. I don't know where he grew up, but he is the A.B. Rhodes Professor of Old Testament and the director of the Grommeyer Award, which is an award that is given by University of Louisville and the Louisville Seminary every year to a religious writer. So it's quite, and it's a money award, so it's quite prestigious. And he has 3 kids. He's just a really, really, really good guy. So anything that he writes, I think I mentioned last time, he tries to write a book and he dedicates it to one of his children. So if you have the book, this one is to Taft, his son Taft. So, and I like his books because they're real thin. You can get some good content and not be overwhelmed. I just love the contrast from that picture to that one. This is the professor and the director, this is the fun guy, So anyway, so I thought we might look at this stuff. We'll certainly get through much of this material, maybe not much of the chapter 3, but so the way we left it last week was we're talking about kind of what he calls a theological posture. When we think about other religions, other traditions, right? We talked last time how we are in a pluralistic, very diverse society. We live in one of the most religiously diverse countries in the world, really, And if anybody has more examples of that, I'd love to hear. We heard some about mixed marriages, Catholic and a Protestant. Well, now mixed marriages can be a Jewish person and a Christian, a Muslim, a Baha'i, a Buddhist, many, many, many different religions. So we're Christians, right? We follow the way of Jesus. How do we imagine? How do we approach? How do we respond to the religious diversity that's all around us is kind of the main question. And Tyler will talk about 3 general approaches. Now, I've seen this played out in 6 different ways or 8 different ways. He just has 3 kind of straightforward ways. One is exclusivism, and we'll talk about these. Another is inclusivism, and the one he argues for is pluralism. So just think about that. We live in a religiously diverse world, country. We are Christians, followers of Jesus. What is our approach when we think about or interact with people of other faith traditions, okay? People who are not Christian, all right? Okay, one is exclusivism. And this would be an approach which says Christianity is the only true religion. Other religions may think they have the truth. They are sadly mistaken, this approach would say. We have the truth, all right? Jesus Christ is the only means to salvation, all right? Other faiths, I think I told you this story, my daughter, Katie, was dating this nice Southern Baptist boy, and he says to her one night, now your faith, that's one of those fake religions, right? And she says, excuse me? And Presbyterians, that's one of those fake, that's not really believers in Jesus. And of course, she just laid into him and they broke up. But anyway, no. Zach, his name was, I don't know today, but his growing up church would very much be in this tradition. Other religions, okay, they may have some value, but if you want to get to heaven, it's Jesus. That's it. What else is up here? Okay. The truth about God it resides exclusively in Christianity and is not found anywhere else. So one of my very best friends from college, he and his wife, also a good friend, they were Presbyterian. They've gone now to a more conservative church. And one of the reasons they did that is their pastor, this is a church in the middle of Indiana, Pennsylvania. Just sounds kind of odd, but there is a city called Indiana in Pennsylvania. It's where Jimmy Stewart is from. If you ever, there's a little museum called the Jimmy Stewart Museum. Anyway, their pastor, Presbyterian Church, preached a sermon, and he kind of posited or said, did anyone think we would meet Mahatma Gandhi in heaven? Okay, Gandhi, you know, is not Christian, right? He's a Muslim, right? Would we meet him in heaven? And this is a university town. Indiana University of Pennsylvania is there. So this, you know, for most of the congregation, this was interesting. This was, you have a paper there. This was something to imagine or think about. My friend AC is the wife, Bob a little bit. AC's father, who lived there at the time, had a fit. They just could not imagine that being preached. Gandhi was not a Christian. There is no way we're going to meet him in heaven. Sorry for him, but that's it. And how dare this pastor preach that and try to get us to imagine anything different. So he left the church, and AC left the church, and Bob later left the church. And he was on the session, and he didn't go to church, but he went to session meetings. I said, you should be ashamed of yourself. If you're going to leave. Don't, no, I'm going to work my whole term. But I think eventually I talked him into it. So anyway, that is a true stance, right? I've told you my experience with serving the church in Skokie for a little while. And it was, at the time, very divided church. I preached a sermon once about Jesus and the officer in the Italian cohort, his daughter, whom Jesus healed, right? And I say, this guy's in the Italian, he was a Roman citizen. He was not a follower of Jesus. He was not Jewish, and yet Jesus healed his child. So this is how God works, you know? And I mentioned something about Eboo Patel, who I mentioned, he's a Chicago person, Muslim, founder of the Interfaith Youth Corps. I had people yell at me in the narthex after that sermon. And the man who yelled, God bless his soul, God rest his soul now, Christianity is the only true religion. And the fact that I in the pulpit would even hint that God's grace might be extended toward people who are not Christian, like, to my mind, it says right in the Bible, right? He had a fit. So there is this view out there, all right? It may not be your view, it might be your view, I don't know. But anybody have any response to that, or know people like that, or have a sense of this? It's a pretty, like I said, it's an exclusivist understanding. Anybody? What's that?
Makes heaven smaller.
Makes heaven smaller, yeah. What are those jokes about, well, something about the Catholics who think they're the only people up here. Something about heaven like that, you know, I mean, that's a joke I heard. I don't know the whole joke, obviously, but yeah, makes heaven a lot smaller, right? In my Father's house are many mansions. No, sorry. Many ways in. No. Only one house, right? And that is the view of some folks. So anybody else, family members or neighbors, or you probably don't talk about this stuff, right? This would not be something you discuss. Okay, another view that many people adhere to, I'm kind of in this camp, I suppose, at least I was, inclusivism. All right, so we got exclusivism, just us, you're out there, sorry you don't have it. Inclusivism, right? Sounds better, right? We're including people. Opens the possibility of salvation for non-Christians, you know? God's grace is extended to non-Christians, right? People who don't believe in Jesus, but they still see salvation as coming ultimately through Jesus Christ. So we have heard the joyful sound, Jesus saves, and Jesus is going to save everybody. So this leans a little bit toward a universalistic understanding of salvation. All will be saved. Now, other religions, they have value. I mean, they're good, right? People are other, they're Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish, they all have value. However, saving grace comes ultimately through Jesus Christ. This is, I heard Billy Graham once kind of talk this way, right? We actually got to meet him. He came to Syracuse when Judy and I were there as pastors. Judy was on the receiving committee, so we got invited to the dinner with him before, which was kind of before the crusade. It was very cool. And I would say he kind of comes down in this understanding, right? Jesus is the way, and Jesus, God's grace, is so inclusive that all will be welcomed in. But the saving grace is ultimately Jesus. Any insight or reflection? So in other words, this approach to other religions is not exclusivism. Other religions, sorry, what's the phrase? You're going to hell in a handbasket, right? You're not in. Inclusivism, you're in, but your religion, your faith tradition, it's okay, but it doesn't have the ultimate truth. We've got the ultimate truth, and Jesus is going to save you, right? But it's disconnected from your faith and your tradition, right? And that's a view of a lot of people, you know? Any response or reflection? Anybody know? Yeah, please.
Feels like trying to have it both ways.
Yeah.
Just that you're straddling the fence.
Yeah, one of my professors called that neo-middle of the roader, right? You're on the middle of the road. You're not, you're on the fence. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, please, Jan.
You make a strong case for the fact that we as human beings really are not capable of understanding all of God.
Well, and that's critically important. Yeah.
As all people are saved through Jesus Christ, I may never have heard of Jesus Christ.
Exactly. And isn't God?
That doesn't mean that Jesus is not going to save me.
Right. Exactly. Right.
And for me, that gives me hope.
Yeah.
I've known some Christians that were just bedeviled by the need that they had, that it was our fault that people were going to go to hell.
Yeah.
Because we didn't tell them.
We didn't save them. Right. Yeah. When Judy and I were serving in Louisville, in fact, I asked to be excused from the session meeting because our session met the same night as the Fern Creek Highview Area Ministries Board. Right. So I said, Judy, you take. No, I think the clerk did. The clerk took over, and I went to this meeting because what was happening at that meeting was they were redoing the personnel manual for this area ministries, and it was all Christian groups in this area ministry. We didn't have any temples or synagogues in the immediate area where I served, right? And someone was providing an amendment that all employees had to be Christian. Okay. Now, they would lose their government funding if that were the case, right? But that wasn't so much the issue. So I go to the meeting and I say, I'm rather encouraged that we have this area ministries, And I look forward to the day, if the day ever comes, that on this corner, we're on one Presbyterian, and in that corner might be a Jewish synagogue, and on that corner might be a mosque, and that together we would continue to support this area ministries because we're providing food for people. They also had an adult daycare center, and many of you know that's needed. A lot of our adults who have some dementia, some other struggles, this was a godsend for these families. They could bring their parent, most loved one, to this. They would be cared for the day, kind of like adult daycare is what it was. Huge program, so successful. The Baptist in the room came after me. He says, well, if that ever happens, I'm quitting this organization. And I'm like, why? Well, because it's just Jesus, exclusivism, right? It's just Jesus. And I said, well, I would support a more inclusive view, this view, and we didn't get into where this, here's my Siri talking. We didn't get into, salvation. Her argument for having everyone be Christian on the staff was, well, what if a non-Christian walked in and didn't know about Jesus? My job, she said, She's talking about herself. The woman Southern Baptist pastor, okay, just remember, who was recently just kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention. Just, that looks like a month ago. We heard from her, right? My job is to get people into heaven. And in my head was, that's beyond my skill set. You know? God gets people into heaven, and we have responsibility to tell the good news of Jesus for this life and for the life everlasting. And so I would be anyone can serve in this organization who has passion to help people, who is caring, who is concerned about love and justice. Those are the kind of folks. They may or may not be Christian. They might be humanists. They might be Jewish, but they still have a desire to help others in this area ministries. Well, the vote was taken. I didn't have a vote. I wasn't on the board. The vote was taken. Linda, her name, and her other person voted for this amendment. The rest of the board voted no. And I kind of felt bad, because she was making her argument. But the rest of the board was like, no, we're not going to. Of course, also the funding may have been one of the reasons too, right? They lose their funding. So these are real things, right, in area ministries and in our lives. So how do we approach them? The third one is a more pluralism approach. So, and this is Tyler. He just says it right out. That's where he is, right? All religions are equal and valid paths to the one divine reality. If I said that in my parish in Skokie, a third of the people would have probably gotten up and walked out, Many would have stayed and would have said, yes, I agree with this, all right? Christ is one revelation among many equally important revelation. You say that in some Presbyterian churches, you get run out on the rail, right? It just wouldn't fly. Any response to that one? So Buddhists, Baha'i, Sikh, all are valid paths to the one divine reality. I think Alex might come down on this. I don't know. Is he here? No, he's not here. All right, I can't ask him. So, yes, what do you say, Tom? Yeah.
How are we supposed to know as individuals which of these, it's such a big question. It seems like a little grain of sand, like I am, how do I get hung up on all this?
Well, yeah.
That's fine for me.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's a good approach. So he's trying to just set out the framework of what is our response as followers of Jesus to other religions, right? And so and he's positing a less judgmental approach. The others might have more of especially the exclusivism, a judgment approach, And these are very general, he said. This is not very, very, very specific, but it is now, we don't have, is there a temple within the bounds of Arlington Heights? I don't think there is there? Close? Where's one close? Buffalo Grove, that's not far. I've ridden my bike up there, that's not far at all, right? So a temple there, We don't have a First Pres Buffalo Grove, but I wonder what is the level of interreligious cooperation between them. It'd be important to, where they come out here, right? It's at some level in order to work cooperatively. I haven't been out in Skokie. We had an awesome ecumenical interreligious ministerial association, Where I was in Louisville, we're all Christians of various flavors, Lutherans, Catholics, Southern Baptists, Presbyterians. In Skokie, we had the imam who was there, Safid, who was the imam, which is the kind of the pastor of the very large mosque in Morton Grove. And then we had several Jewish, one of my neighbors who grew up around here, I said I was a pastor in Skokie. He said, I didn't know there were any Christians in Skokie, because that's the main Jewish area, right? So, and then of course we had Jew and Christians, yeah.
You also mentioned a long time ago, you had, Assyrians
A lot of Assyrian people, and they were mostly Christians.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were, in fact, I just met a woman today. Her name, I said, is your name? She said, I'm from Iran. And I said, she said, Persia. So, well, you know, that's the Assyrians, not the Syrians, the Assyrians, yeah. And mostly because of our Presbyterian evangelistic efforts generations ago, a lot of people from Iran who immigrate here, if they're not Muslim, they are Presbyterian because of those things. So, so Jesus is equal among many different religions, and these are ways we can, you know, we can approach. So truth can be found in all religions. And, you know, I'm just sitting here thinking of my friend Bob and AC, especially AC. She's the more, I don't know what she'd say to that. She'd be worried about me. I mean, she really would, you know. I remember sending her stuff, theological, from a theology class, and she's, Kenny, I'm praying for you. I was Kenny, you know, so because I'm even going there, right? And maybe we don't talk about this stuff a lot, you know. If this were conversation around the Hockenberry Hartung family, Judy's sister, Jean, would be very upset because she's not there, you know. I don't know what, and try to imagine this in your family. Some of you have interreligious folk within your families, yes? Does this kind of stuff ever come up, or do we just, we don't talk about it? No, yeah, we don't talk about it. Yeah, Ken.
You know, I struggled for a while with why I'm a Christian, and I think a lot of it came about culturally. I was born into a Christian community, and I think that really is a starting point for anybody's religious, either where were you born and what was the culture around it. And I think where pluralism comes in is the more we become familiar with these others, we broaden this pot to which we're born.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I'm Presbyterian because my mother grew up within walking distance as a child of the Presbyterian church. I mean, that's the only reason, right? She was baptized in the Methodist church. The family moved, Presbyterian church down the street. They walked. Here we are. Just a quick story. Her mother, my grandmother, the oldest sister, decided one day that the children should be in church. And we're going to go to the first church we find. So they piled into the car. They came down one street. They turned right on Mount Hope Road. They come into Dover, New Jersey. Now, the story there is if they went straight, they would have found St. Mary's Church, Catholic church. My mother says they wouldn't have gone there. But anyway, they turned right, and they came to Grace Methodist Church. And so they were Methodist. I mean, that's it. That's the only reason. It wasn't theological discussion and get out the books and study. No. I mean, maybe today some folks do that, right? They look and then they decide, you know. But it was, you know, what you grew up with, right? You're kind of growing up tradition. And so that has a huge influencer, you know. Unless, you know, you're growing up tradition. A lot of friends, if you have any friends in the Methodist church now, there's a lot of tension in the Methodist church now. Like you read about it. Now, if you probably went down the street and talked with, who was the pastor at Trinity Church? Trinity Methodist. I can't remember her name. It's right down Euclid. Wonderful church. Oh, I should have met her several times. Anyway, many churches, my uncle, who was in the Methodist church, now he's Episcopalian. Because there's this huge controversy now in the Methodist church, which the Presbyterian church had, about our response to gay and lesbian folk out in the world and marriage, right? And the United Methodist Church has kind of had huge controversy about it, and now there's a split off, and they're calling themselves the Global Methodist Church. And the Global Methodist Church is the more conservative, right? Not open to gay or lesbian folk being involved in the life of the church, certainly not doing marriages between two men or two women, whereas the United Methodist Church is more the progressive, all are welcome, you know, and ordination and so on. My friend who's a Methodist, she says, really, we've been a divided church for the last 30 years, and now it's just kind of coming into reality. So these are important things, you know, for people. And I think the more exposure one has, my growing up, my mom had a lot of friends who were Jewish. So I've been to Seder meals, as a kid a lot. Even with wine, I got to, that was fun, right? Get little glass. And there's 4 glasses of wine, you're at a Seder meal. It's not just 4 glasses before, gefilte fish and matzah, and they make this, I think it's called harosith. It's like an apple date, right? It's the mortar, right? It was the mortar for the bricks that they, whatever. And eggs, and you had a little bit of parsley, and you dip it in salt water, and that was the horseradish, yeah, so matzah.
I had, a long time ago,
Try to eat that horseradish.
when I was growing, I've been to many churches, but went to a Lutheran church, and one time, it was when I was a teenager in Whitehall, Michigan.
Right.
I liked everything except for the horseradish.
You like a horse, yeah.
No, see, but the
It's
thing
kind of
is,
tough to have
we had
horseradish.
We had to read stuff. You had
Right.
to
Take a
the
taste,
horseradish,
yeah.
And you could not, and then you had to read, and then had the lip.
To
then
wash
had
it
the lip.
down, yeah.
Yes, but I
So,
could not stand the.
well, no, the horseradish, and that's for the bitterness, right? The
Yes, I couldn't
bitterness.
stand it.
So, so there's just just that conversation, and some of us you're nodding. That's interfaith work, right? That shows a level of desire to be blessed, to be encouraged by folk of other traditions, right? I didn't grow up with anybody Muslim, so I don't have some of that, but I mean, some of you probably have. Yes, please.
My husband and I, pastors at a church elsewhere, which will not be named.
Will not be named. Very good.
Shall not be named, did a Seder, the Christian Seder.
Christian Seder, sure, yeah.
Christian Seder.
Yeah.
And he read in Hebrew, and,
Oh, wonderful, yeah.
that was the one and only time it was tried, because the general consensus was it was too Jewish.
Too Jewish, see, yeah.
We're not gonna do it again.
And that was a negative, right? Too Jewish. Yeah, see what? Yeah, Jesus, yeah. I told you all that story. I tell the men all the time, Karl Barth, people get up and left during his sermon because his sermon title was Jesus Was a Jew. And this was in Germany in the 1930s. And guess what? Right? Anti-Semitism was strong. I mean, people literally, he started preaching, they got up and walked out. Now that's pretty tough for a preacher, right? It's that bad, but that was the sermon title, right? Yeah.
A Jewish friend of mine told me, Jesus had one thing that you can't have and you will never have, a Jewish mother.
It's yeah, that's right. He had a very Jewish mother and a very Jewish father, right? As Luke says, so-called father, right? Joseph. Yeah. So this notion that there is truth can be found in other traditions, I think has value. I really think it does have.
Is all Presbyterian and all Lutheran or?
Yeah, all different ones.
I mean, do they practice like the same thing?
Well, it's been very different.
Well, then, like, okay, this Presbyterian church, does another Presbyterian church?
It really depends.
Practice the same thing?
It really depends, yeah. Similar. You'll see similarities, so that's for sure. All right, now this is, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Month or so ago, Alex had part of his preaching, something about the Methodist Church, and they leave a line out, and I can't remember in the Apostles' Creed.
Oh, yes, so that's,
Why is that?
the line they leave out is, he descended into hell. And there's a whole history.
United Methodist?
That's all the Methodists. So I'm in the choir, my little church, half the size of this room. And I'm in the choir, and my Nana, my grandmother, is sitting in the pew. And we're saying the Apostles' Creed, and we get to that part, and she goes. She looks right at us. I'm not saying that part because she's Methodist. So, yeah, that's left. Anybody know the story? There's a whole history about that. So he descended into hell. There's a good article that one of my friends just wrote about that. I should send that to you all. Jesus, some would say Jesus went to the abode of the dead and freed them too, is one interpretation. It was added later to the creed. So John Wesley, for some reason, probably didn't like it, right? To my mind, that phrase simply says Jesus was really dead. He was dead, dead, dead. Dead as a doornail, whatever that phrase is, right? So that, I think, is the meaning behind that phrase. And for some, the Methodists, they don't do it. They just won't. The Orthodox won't do what's called the Philoke clause, that the Spirit, we say the Spirit descended from the Father and the Son. Oh no, they take that out. They don't like that. So different ones on the creed. I'll do some research on that one, but there are some reasons why that's not said, So this is an important point he makes here. In this book, I'm not trying to solve the problem of religious diversity of pluralism. He says, seeing this as a problem is negative, and it is. Oh, this is a problem, Wouldn't it be better if all religions had the same, believed the same things, right? He doesn't see it as a problem. Rather, he sees religious diversity as a promise that we have to explore, right? So to me, it's a very open, accepting, and as I said last week, we should rejoice and give thanks to God when we hear other people talk about their faith tradition and hear things that sound very similar to our faith tradition, right? That should be a reason for joy, right? So when I go to the Ministerial Association meeting in the synagogue in Skokie, and I hear them talking about an ecumenical Thanksgiving Eve service that we programmed, it really was delightful to go to the mosque. We didn't go to the mosque because we couldn't go in the mosque, right? Only the Muslims. So we went to a school that they organized there in Skokie, and to hear some things that they're talking about that sound familiar to us, their care for children, some reference to that, Jesus loves the little children. Oh, right, things that sound familiar, love and justice, concern for justice, right, should be not a negative, oh, we have this problem of all these different faiths. No, it should be a positive diversity as promise that can be explored and can be talked about. This is interesting. He quotes Rabbi Abraham Heschel. We had to read Heschel in seminary, right? Diversity of religions is the will of God. Whew. That's quite a loaded statement, right? What is God's will in terms of God's intention for the world? And Rabbi Heschel said, well, diversity is what God wants because look at all we've got. We have this diversity of religion. Now, as Alex pointed out, he was here last week, we have a lot of people who are the nones, N-O-N-E-S, who don't choose religion, right? I gave that quote by C.S. Lewis, who talks about, religion as a great big house and their hallways, and we're all in the hallways. And it's okay to be in the hallway, but if you want to eat, you want to have fellowship, you want to sit down, you need to go into a room. So he was saying you need to kind of affiliate with some tradition, right? Presbyterian, Jewish, Muslim, something. He says, find a room, because in the room there are chairs, there are chairs, and there's food, and there's fellowship, right? Some people are choosing to stay in the hallway, Lewis would probably say today. And I don't think that's ultimately beneficial, right? I'd rather be in a room with you all, right? And have a meal downstairs and be tied to some community of faith. So this possibility here is what Tyler raises in the book. Diversity of religions is God's intention for the world, right? Now, an exclusivist Christian wouldn't say that. An inclusivist Christian might say that. But Jesus is going to save them, in the end, right? So, all right. Okay, so this next chapter, I have a couple quotes up here. So the title chapter is Chosenness. And when I wrote that out, I got the little red line, underneath. That means it's misspelt, right? This idea of being chosen, and he wants to take a fresh look at the full story of Genesis, one which takes seriously our Christian vocation to love our neighbor. So that's interesting. So that's kind of the Calvin talked about, looking at the world through Scripture-colored glasses. And we've heard the phrase looking at the world through rose-colored glasses. Everything's rosy because you put on rose-colored glasses and you don't see the rough stuff. Everything's wonderful. Well, no. We view the world through the lens of Scripture. He wants to view Scripture through the lens of the Christian vocation to love our neighbors. And some of our neighbors are Jewish, and some of our neighbors are Muslim, and some of our neighbors are Buddhists and Sikhs and other, right? So how do we, and some are Buddhists, right? How do we love our neighbor? And we know that's pretty big, right? The greatest commandments are to love God and love your neighbor. That's 1 and 2, right? Got the 10 over here, 1 and 2. And you could take the 10, sidebar here, you could take the 10 and say the first 4 are about love of God, or the first 3 are about love of God. The bottom 6 are about love of neighbor, right? No coveting, no stealing, no lying, right? And the middle commandment is about the Sabbath. And that's what keeps this in balance, right? Love of God, love of neighbor. These are kept in good balance because we have Sabbath. We rest. We give ourselves a break and not worry about the creation. It can do its own thing. So he wants to look at the entire Scripture from the stance of love of neighbor. And I think it's a valid approach, right? How does this text help me love my neighbor better? There may be other approaches, but that's one that he sets up and wants us to explore. If we are God's chosen people, right, which, I'm preaching up at Deerfield a week from Sunday, and the text is from 1 Peter. You are a royal nation, a holy priesthood, God's own people, so that you may declare the marvelous works, etc., right? So if we are God's chosen people, well, that at first glance looks pretty exclusive, right? I'm chosen, which means, guess what? You're not, right? So that has an exclusive lean to it, right? So he wants us to reconsider our understanding of chosenness by considering some stories in the Bible that we do not know and seldom, if ever, read, especially about these 3 brothers. Now we're going to get into some of that tonight. So he suggests there are stories in the Bible, text in the Bible, right? Text in the Bible that encourage us to reconsider our understanding of chosenness. Now that's a very Jewish concept too, right? God's chosen people. God chose, there's a wonderful text in Deuteronomy 8, says it was not because you were big or you were popular or you were good looking that God chose you. It was because it was because the Lord God loved you and chose you, right? It wasn't anything about you, it was about God's love to you. So that sounds like, well, I've got chosen. If I'm chosen, does that logically mean others are not? And to your point earlier, Jan, who are we to imagine God's ways, right? Maybe God chooses a lot more people than we think God chooses, right? Yeah. So this is kind of tough to read. Anybody have good eyes? I would ask someone else to read. This is the text from Deuteronomy. I did that backwards. So he lifts up this text as a one to explore when we're talking about this notion of chosenness. Anybody in good voice, so you could, and good eyesight, you could read that? Oh, way in the back of the room. Go.
Deuteronomy 4:5-8. See, just as the Lord my God has charged me, I now teach you statutes and ordinances for you to observe in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. You must observe them and perform them, for this will show your wisdom and discernment to the peoples, who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this great nation is a wise and discerning people. For what other great nation has God so near to it as the Lord our God is whenever we call to him? And what other great nation has statutes and ordinances just as this entire law that I am setting before you today?
Okay, thank you much. This is the words of Moses, right? This is Moses speaking. And if you're curious, the narrative setup for all of Deuteronomy is in Deuteronomy 1 and 2. Moses starts speaking. They're all about to cross over the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Moses can't go, right? And Moses goes on for 30 chapters. And then at the end of Deuteronomy, he dies. And that's the Deuteronomy text, and this is part of the 30 chapters, long sermon, right, of preaching that he's doing. What the meat of this verse, right, of this section, there are statutes and ordinances that you have to observe, right? There's the 10 Commandments, right? The Big Ten, right? And you must observe these. Why? If you observe them, it will show your wisdom and discernment to your people and to peoples, other traditions, other people live in other countries, right? Because they will see and they will hear what you're doing, and they will say, look at those great Jews. Look at them, right? They are surely a great nation, right? And what other nation has God so near? Right? God is the nearness of God, right? The psalmist, everybody, right hand. The psalmist says God is as close to you as your own right hand, right? Right here, right? What other nation has that? And what other great nation has these statutes and ordinances that you can obey so that God will be near to you? This is a good thing, right? And this kind of, well, it does. It leads towards this notion of chosenness. God has chosen the Jewish people, right? You have these statutes and commandments and ordinances of the Lord that you are to obey, and this will help you to be wise, and others will be impressed. And that's all a good thing, right? So that's one text. I keep saying Tyler, his name is Tyler Mayfield, but anyway, first name. That's interesting too. At Louisville Seminary, everybody goes by their first name, even the professors. I could not get used to that, you know? Now, I don't, Ken, I'm not a professor, I'm not a PhD, but if I dared to call one of my professors at Princeton, Bob or Jim, I mean, like, you Dr. Carl Fried Froelich, you're Dr. Froelich, and you're Dr. Meyer, I'm not going to call you Dan, Anyway, just, it's kind of weird. Anyway, Tyler says that. All right, then he says, look at this verse. All right, so this could lean toward exclusivism, he says, right? Only Israel, not other nations, have wisdom. God has chosen them. We've got it. Everybody else, sorry about your luck, right? We've got it, you don't. Contrast this to a text he finds in Amos. Now, Amos, one of the minor prophets. Amos is known for let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That's where that text comes from, right? Anyway, this is much shorter. Anybody else want to read for us? Now, this has some hard words, so take your time. Anybody out loud?
Amos 9 and 7. Are you not like the Cushites to me, O people of Israel, says the Lord? Did I not bring Israel up from the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Caphtor, and the Arameans from Kir?
I never read that verse before. Never. Well, hold on. We'll get there. Hold on. So what does this verse suggest? It's in Amos. It's in the Bible. What does that suggest to us? It suggests the Jews weren't the only people. So they were chosen, but they weren't the only chosen, right? According to Amos, well, I don't know much about the Cushites. I'd have to research. There's no text. There may be others, words in the Bible, but there's no material that we have that talks about the Cushites. There's no material that talks about an exodus of the Philistines from Caphtor. There's no other text that talks about how God liberated the Armenians from Kir. I never heard of this, right? Never heard of this. And this is not in the lectionary. You don't read this stuff, right? So what is this saying? This text leans toward a more pluralistic view. Maybe God has other Exodus people, he says. Yeah. What? It wasn't just Moses and the Israelites, they weren't the only, there were others who might have been chosen. You got to be kidding me, right? So what does that say about our approach to the scripture? What does that say? We think we're the exclusive, we've got the truth. Within our Bible itself, right, and there'll be other examples I'll talk about, especially with these three brothers, there is textual text in the text that says God has other Exodus people. And that's our interpretation of what we just read. So that to me is a very expansive, we don't know. We have this text, the Bible. This is a book, someone, thank you. Not the Bible, but we have this text. There are other texts, or there's evidence within our text itself that leans toward God providing escape from slavery, right? Liberation from an oppressed system of Pharaoh of Egypt, right? Just like the Egyptians, treated the people of Israel bad, it could be that the people of Captor treated the Philistines badly, and God brought them out. And it could be the people of Kir, whoever in charge, were not very nice to the Armenians, and so God liberated them also. I don't know. That's what it says. So that leans toward a more, to our reading, an expansive, or he would say pluralistic view. Perhaps God has other Exodus people we don't know about, right? But it is, you've heard the phrase, your God is too small, right? You think God is just here. Well, no. Right? The holy, who can comprehend? And this is an example of our comprehension of God is limited because right within our texts, within the Bible, it says God, there's not much of an interpretive leap for that, right? This is not some wacko interpretation. It's pretty straightforward that, at least as far as the prophet Amos is concerned, this is God speaking, right, to Amos. God worked in the life of the Philistines and in the life of the Cushites and in the life of the Armenians to bring about a similar liberation from oppression, just like God worked for the people of Israel. Are you not like these folks, O people of Israel? Did I not bring up Israel from the land of Egypt? Oh, but there are some others that God brought up from other lands because there was oppression and slavery and exploitation, and God is working to liberate those folks too. So that very, very expansive view of that, all right? So could be that's what's going on. If you have your book, you might turn to page 34, and I didn't get this far, but page 34, if I just want to say to you, tell me a little bit about, of the story of Abraham, right? We know about Abraham, and we know a little about Sarah, right? And do we know about Abraham's first son? Anybody? Abraham's first son. We know about the second son, right? We know about Isaac, right? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. That's the phrase we hear a lot, right? If you read the text. Abraham's first son, anybody? Ishmael, very good, Ishmael, Now that would suggest, my understanding of the text, well, Abraham, there was Hagar, right? And the story goes, Sarah couldn't have a child, so she kind of exploited or took advantage of her slave woman and said, here, Abraham, she has the baby, Ishmael, right? Sarah gets jealous, then of course Isaac comes along later, there's jealousy and all that, so we know that part of the story. How many children then does Abraham have? 2, All right, that's what I thought. And then you look at page 36, and you can't see it from there, but apparently down the road, Abraham married again. Where do we find this? In the Bible. And he married a woman called Keturah and had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So Abraham had 8 children. I never knew that. That wasn't part of my study at seminary. We were emphasized the main characters of the story. Abraham, a little bit Ishmael, fine. Isaac, Jacob, all the way to, right, the New Testament, you know. But there's within the text, other text that talks about these other sons, right? And then there's a whole list on this, can't see on this side. These are the children of Ishmael. Well, this is from the Bible. This isn't, you know, Tyler just researching some ancient text. All of this is in the Bible, but he says we're kind of encouraged, or we lean toward the main characters of the story, when there are other characters who are less popular, who have a word for us. And one of those is Cain, right? One of those is Cain. So the story of Cain we will get to certainly next week, and I'm going to try to get us a little bit into Ishmael. We'll see how we do. We could start now. We have a little bit of time. What do we know about Cain? What's the one thing we know about Cain? He killed Abel. End of story. Right. Move on. Right. So the text there, you'll want to do a little homework. God asks Cain good questions. The text that we'll look at is from Genesis 4. Most of us are pretty familiar with the story of Genesis 1 and 2. Alex preached to them the creation stories, right? We don't read Genesis 4 so much. It's the particular story about Cain and Abel. And it's quite a long text. And it does talk about how this, here he says here, surprisingly, the story of Cain and Abel, found in Genesis 4, is not assigned as an Old Testament lesson in the Revised Common Lectionary. I'm mostly a lectionary preacher, right? I read those texts and I preach them, you know. But there are other texts. He says he's preaching, where do you say? He's preaching at one church. He's preaching a sermon at this church, and he preaches on Cain and Abel. And the pastor comes up to him and says, I've never heard, here it is. I preached recently on the complicated and fascinating story of Cain and Abel. A young Presbyterian pastor remarked that she had never heard a sermon on Cain and Abel. How was this formative story overlooked in churches? All right, so we'll leave you with that hanging. And if you all want some homework, you know the book, you can read Genesis chapter 4 about the birth of Cain and Abel and what they get into. And then the rest, here it is, what is it, Paul Harvey?
Yes.
Right? Now we're dating ourselves, Paul Harvey. The rest of the story about Cain, and if you want to look a little ahead even further about the rest of the story about Ishmael, you can look at that, and that would be further in Genesis. I'll find that text, Genesis 16. So homework, if you want, Genesis 4. That's easy. 4 times 4 is 16. So we can look at those two texts and be out of class 6 minutes early, and we'll see you next week. Okay? That sound good? All right. Okay. Thank you all. Hopefully my voice will be a little back next week. Thank you. All right.